Hello, and thank you for attending today's Microsoft Dynamics Business Applications, the Modern Day Sales Funnel webinar. Feel free to get social during our presentation using the hashtag MSDynApps, MSDynApps. At the end of the webinar, you'll find information about the speakers you'll be hearing from today. We also invite you to watch our two previous webinars, The Power of Sales and Marketing Alignment and Account-Based Everything. So with that, I'd like to introduce our host for today, author and president of Social Centered Selling, Barbara Giamanco. Barbara, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, and hello and welcome everybody. Really excited to have you join us for today's presentation. We're going to be talking about the modern day sales funnel. As mentioned, I am Barb Giamanco, and I'm going to be your host for today's program. And today we're going to be talking about some of the following: why the modern day sales funnel doesn't really follow a linear path anymore, and how buyer behavior is really driving a high degree of need for change. We'll talk about the steps to help move prospects through the sales funnel and build loyalty, as well as the role that content plays today in aligning with the modern funnel. We also want to talk with you about strategies to help salespeople get involved in the buying process before a decision is made, and how the internet and social channels provide new opportunities to build flexible and scalable pipelines. And finally, as we like to do in every session, we'll share with you actions that you can take now to start adapting to this changing business world. So it's my pleasure, and I'm delighted to welcome Matt Hines, CEO of Hines Marketing, and Carol Kroll, Editor-in-Chief of Demand Gen Report. Both of our guests today bring a great deal of experience and research to the conversation that applies to both sales and marketing. Matt, Carol, I'm so glad you're here. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Thanks, Barb. Good to be here.
Absolutely. Well, so here's what I'd like to do first. Let's go ahead and kick off. Matt, let's start with you. Take a minute and tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, my name is Matt Hines. I started Hines Marketing about 8 years ago, and we describe ourselves as sales pipeline people. We are a bunch of B2B marketers that think in terms of the full sales pipeline contribution, not just top of funnel. So we're doing demand generation, lead management, sales enablement, really helping marketers kind of have a full funnel marketing mentality to the way that they support not only the top of the pipeline, but support the sales team's effort as well. Certainly that role is getting more complex for B2B marketers as new technology enters the field, as we grapple with big data, as we address a more diverse and a more educated buyer audience. But there's tons of great examples of companies doing great work, providing value for their customers and growing their business. And so excited to talk about some of those examples here today.
Excellent. Well, Carol, how about you? Tell us about you.
So I'm Editor-in-Chief of Demand Gen Report. We're 7+ years old. We are a publication online dedicated to all things Demand Gen. Actually got our start writing about the marketing automation space. And as the marketing technology, what's Scott Brinker's number today, 3,800 different marketing technologies out there, our coverage has kind of expanded to include things like predictive analytics and account-based marketing, but really our bread and butter is talking to B2B marketers about generating leads and generating demand. So we have this online publication, a weekly newsletter. We publish about 8 or 9 benchmark surveys per year, as well as special reports, and we even have a live event once a year, B2B, C2C, content to conversion, and Demand Gen Summit. So that's really exciting for us, and we target a very specific audience.
Excellent. Well, I've been a fan of Demand Gen, as you know, for a while, and I follow the research, and I appreciate all the work that you do. And, of course, Matt and I have been friends and colleagues for quite some time, and I always learn every time I have the opportunity to do a session with Matt. So I'm glad to have you both here. So we're going to go ahead and jump into the conversation. So we know the sales funnel has traditionally represented how a sale proceeds, right, through kind of a linear fashion from buyer awareness to buyer action. But today, the rapid pace of innovation and change in buyer behavior is really kind of pushing that, right? It's kind of pushing B2B sales and marketing organizations to really re-examine and rethink what they thought they knew about finding, engaging, and converting prospects into customers. So Matt, I'd like to start with you. Based on the work you do, what's your perspective on today's modern sales funnel? Is it the same as it used to be? Are there parts of it that are the same? And, what's different? So tell us what your thoughts are there.
Well, yes, I think it's a great question, and I think it's something we've been questioning a lot over the last couple of years. Like, are prospects really following this path like they used to? And I think my first answer is, well, they never really did. Even when prospects were less educated on their own, when they needed a seller to help educate them on something, they still followed their own path. They weren't flowing literally through a process. They would have fits and starts. They would go backwards. The sales funnel has always been more amoeba-like. I think today it's maybe more chaotic than it's ever been. But I still believe very strongly in the concept, or at least the metaphor of the funnel. I believe that as you scale your sales team, and as your sales and marketing teams are trying to get on the same page and to build a scalable, repeatable engine to drive growth, the model of the funnel and stages of buying journey that reflects that as well is really important as a way of staying consistent and creating a scalable, repeatable process. So I think you can have that process without requiring every prospect to go through the same stages. We saw this very clearly in the Challenger sale, where it really encourages innovation in the sales process within individual deals to make sure that you're following a process that is repeatable and scalable, but you're also allowing yourself to be innovative to work with individual prospects to help them achieve their results and their outcomes. So very much, I think, look, it's an excuse for companies that are struggling with the modern B2B sales or marketing to say, well, the funnel's dead and that's why we're not selling. No, the funnel's alive and well if you're using it as a management tool, but you just have to still be flexible, as you always have, when it gets down into the weeds of actually moving prospects through to a close.
That's excellent. We're going to talk about some of the things that I think both of you can help suggest and recommend to the audience about how to incorporate that flexibility, if you will, into the overall process. Now, Carol, what are your thoughts? I mean, first, what are your thoughts around this? And then I want to talk about some research that you've recently come out with in a recent buyer research report. So what are your thoughts on this whole, is the funnel dead? Do we need to shift our approach? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't think it's dead, and I don't think it's a linear path. Demand Gen report actually has looked at buyer behavior for several years through our annual B2B buyers benchmark survey. And we just came out with the 2016 numbers a few weeks ago, and in reality, B2B buyers have lots of choices and options. And there's a lot of factors to consider during that purchase process. So one of the things that we definitely are seeing and see in this most recent research is that marketers are slowing down and considering more before they're making purchases. The buying process has become more complex. They're spending more time researching and evaluating purchases, and they're using more sources to do so. So as you can see from the stats here on the screen, research time has absolutely expanded. The use of social media as a research tool has also increased, and companies are relying on peer recommendations. 62% of our respondents said they rely more on peer recommendations, and this is all versus the prior year. And they're also conducting more detailed ROI analysis before making a final decision. The survey also revealed that 54% of buyers are reporting that the buying cycle is longer this year versus last year. So maybe that's not a big surprise that it's getting longer, because we keep hearing that. But the fact that we're witnessing it grow year on year, we feel is notable. Every year we ask that same question in the benchmark, and every year they say, yes, it's longer than last year. B2B buyers told us they prefer to self-navigate, and they often do so anonymously. Hopefully smart marketers can capitalize on some of that and use it to drive intelligence in their campaigns. But definitely not a linear path. Sometimes they're moving fast. When business needs dictate they make a quick decision, they do so, but often we're seeing it's become much more slow and deliberate. There's multiple stakeholders involved. The number of people has also increased according to our research, just the number of people involved in the purchase decision. And add to that the people that are involved in the consideration process are also going out and doing research on their own online and not necessarily engaging directly with a vendor. So there's just a lot involved. There's a lot of complexity, and they also have these choices, and so they're not following that traditional trajectory. But I have to agree with Matt to some extent that they kind of never really did, but even more so today, given all the extra choice that there is there for folks.
Absolutely, I would agree with that. I mean, it's so easy. I mean, I think about myself making a business decision to buy something, whether it's for my business or myself personally, and the first thing that I do when I know that there's something I'm interested in is I'm going to go look it up. And when I speak to, audiences at conferences and so forth, and ask people in the audience, how many of you, when you have a need, go and research? Without question, they really get out there. Now, one thing that's interesting, Carol, is the peer recommendations that people really rely on. I'm just curious. Do you think that sellers are really taking advantage of that in the way that they could, or even marketers for that matter? I'm just curious what your thoughts are
on whether they're taking advantage of peer recommendations. I certainly think the buyer making the considering the purchase is maximizing their use of peers and their ability to reach out to peers and colleagues. I do think that B2B marketers probably have a little bit of catching up to do when it comes to that. We're seeing that review sites on the B2B side have become more important and more prevalent. That's really traditionally been a consumer thing. But now that it's reached the B2B side, I do think there is some catching up that marketers need to do to respond to that, to be transparent, to make it easy, to get that information across.
Yeah, and it strikes me that could be an opportunity for salespeople. I'm curious what you think about that, Matt, but it strikes me as an opportunity for salespeople if they were savvy and smart. I mean, LinkedIn groups kind of started as a way to maybe be able to listen into some conversations people might be having amongst their peers in terms of, products and services that are available, what to buy and from whom, and that sort of thing. Any thoughts from you before we move forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's imperative not only that sales reps understand the industry and the issues their customers go through, but I think it's a fault of the sales managers and trainers that aren't really prioritizing that information. I mean, look at new hire training, look at sales training, look at sales kickoffs. We tend to focus on our products, we tend to focus on our process, and there isn't nearly enough focus on the customer, on their industry, on their environment, and helping our prospects really develop a level of empathy for who their prospects are and what they're going through. And the better you can understand that fundamentally, and the better you can color that based on what people are talking about in the market in real time, I mean, that allows you to have the right, not only does it allow you to build trust and credibility with that prospect, it allows you to have the right conversations with prospects moving forward. It allows you to develop rapport. It allows you to begin to reframe an issue a prospect has been thinking about perhaps a different way that actually builds interest and urgency and helps someone commit to a change that ultimately leads to an active selling process. So yeah, I mean, I think that opportunity is enormous and not nearly enough sales reps, let alone sales managers and trainers, focus on that.
Well, and let's kind of continue that because it's a great segue into, continuing to talk about how this new buyer behavior is really driving the necessity for there to be a better approach to the overall selling/buying process. So what I see, and actually I just read a blog post of yours, Matt, and I got a chuckle out of it because I've certainly written my fair share of posts about the kinds of sales messaging that works and that doesn't. And I had to laugh because you really were essentially saying the essence of the message was the onus is on the person who's reaching out to the buyer to really communicate that value. So here's what we see. We see all this cold outreach, all the emails and phone calls. It's not as effective as it used to be. And for anybody listening, I'm certainly not suggesting we don't use the telephone. It's very important. But the smiling and dialing, the blindly calling people, the sending all these emails with no relevance or value. And your post was really timely, Matt, because it was just talking about the fact, and I also laughed that I said to myself, wow, I've actually received a few of those same emails from that same person. So what do we need leaders to understand in terms of helping them to realize that just cranking out messaging to crank out messaging isn't really driving a real sales outcome? What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, oh man, there's so much to cover on this topic. I mean, the volume of terrible sales emails that we get, and I mean, when I say we, I mean probably everyone listening to and watching this webinar, just terrible stuff. I mean, there's actually a group of us inside of Heinz Marketing that we actually collect and share some of the worst ones. I'm giving a presentation at a conference here in a couple weeks, specifically on sales development communication. And I think the same people that will tell me that cold calling is dead, the same people that will tell me that cold emailing is dead, that you can't start a conversation unless the prospect initiates, they're the same people that send out the crap, the stuff that it doesn't start with something of value to me. It starts with, can I have 15 minutes of your time? And then 24 hours later you get the, hey, just seeing if you got my email. I mean, that is a terrible process and a terrible approach. No one's going to respond to that, but that doesn't mean that prospecting doesn't work. Again, back to my point before, I mean, if you understand your audience and you understand what their objectives are and you understand how to help them challenge the status quo, if you understand how to help your prospects rethink something about their business that could help their business. If you treat yourself not as a sales rep, but as an advocate and champion for your customers' objectives, if you're someone that is bringing value and insight to the conversation with your prospects, every one of your prospects wants to talk to you. Now, they're super busy. They may not have time to answer the phone today. You're still going to have to build trust and differentiate yourself because every other sales rep out there has established a bad precedent, and so your prospect thinks you're going to act like everyone else. But once you get past that initial barrier, once you establish some trust, you can become someone that even before you make the sale, your prospect is looking forward to talking to. So, this relates to relationship building, selling. SDRs can do this in a transactional model. It's all about the approach you take that becomes far more precisely customer and buyer and prospect centric.
Well, I couldn't agree more, and that's why I wanted to get your take on it, because that's my feeling too, that we need to demonstrate, and I know Carol's going to talk about some of this as well that's come out in their research, but it's very clear buyers have different expectations of salespeople today. And I sort of think that if you only get one shot at making that great first impression, the worst thing you could do is to be cranking out emails that have no value for the person that's receiving them. In fact, I was talking to a sales executive yesterday. He told me that he had about 300 emails of the type that we're talking about that had collected over a 2-week period. He didn't respond to a single one. They all were deleted. And yet I wonder how many people think that activity is actually truly leading to driving leads and opportunities into the pipeline. So Carol, what is your thought about this, especially in terms of the work that you've been doing, getting feedback from buyers and that sort of thing? Do you feel like salespeople are really adjusting to this new reality in the way that they should be?
I don't think so. Not as quickly, I think, as their buyers would like, and I think the salespeople that are smart will begin to adapt now, because the buyers are, if anything, only going to get more demanding and have high expectations from these vendors. When we talk to them, the buyers, about the different variables, when they were at a point of evaluating, say, a set list of solution providers, they wanted to know, 3/4 of them wanted to see that person had demonstrated experience with knowledge of their industry. Personalization came up as a very important point as well. And, just getting back to peer recommendations for a moment, in the chart that we'll see on the next slide, those were the third most important resource that informed buyers about their purchase, only behind web search and vendor websites. So, more buyers are obviously, getting to our earlier point, are relying on those peers and colleagues because they need that input in an increasingly crowded technology landscape. And it's only the sales people who can intersect that conversation on social media, for example, they're going to win the day. Because basically, as I said, buyers have more options than ever. Review sites are gaining more importance in the B2B realm, and there was another interesting thing that, and it was really kind of underlined and highlighted in yellow highlight. When we asked what changed in their buying process in the past year, 61% said they do a more detailed ROI analysis before making a purchase. That's because they're facing more financial scrutiny from corporate leadership. They have tighter budgets. They need to prove that their purchase is going to benefit the company's bottom line, because maybe they bought another marketing technology 2 years ago and it didn't quite work out. It's become a real high-stakes process for many buyers. And so these buyers are obviously weighing risk more so today than they have in the past. So I think marketing and sales needs to address that risk. They need to show the buyers how they can mitigate that risk, rather than simply selling to them. They don't want to hear a sales pitch. They want you to address their pain points and find a way out. Integration is another big factor that I think we're going to hear more and more about as B2B buyers are adding more and more technology to the marketing stack. And people are going to be spending more time, not less, on social media talking to other folks or lurking to learn more from people in their industry. So that is going to make social selling incredibly relevant.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I read something in a Harvard Business Review white paper about a year or so ago, and they said, these are B2B executives who said that the sales reps who can demonstrate that they can help solve business problems that they cannot solve on their own, some 72% of them said that played a huge, that was a huge factor in their decision-making process, which clearly from your research, and I know that we also have other things like making the process for salespeople more complex, budget moving to, from marketing to IT, and those longer sales cycles because more people are involved. And what's interesting is that, I think the days of the dog and pony show are kind of dying on the vine, yet that still seems to be the prevalent way that people are selling, although we're going to, talk about, we know a lot of organizations are doing really well, but I think it also gets back to a point that Matt made earlier, which is when training is being conducted, so let's say it's onboarding or even ongoing training, often what I've certainly seen, and I think others would agree, is that the focus tends to be on learn the product features first, learn how to do a great demo, and then, learn our process. Very little, I think, is really going into helping salespeople to learn about, the different buyer personas and how to really, speak to their problems, their issues, and all that sort of thing. So we know that we've got to help people move a prospect through the sales funnel, and there's got to be that, Matt talked about the innovation and the flexibility, but Matt, I also know that as you talk about the buying stages and sort of alignment to the funnel, you talk about 6 stages and what that kind of looks like. Could you walk us through that?
Yeah, I mean, so I tend to put a lot of credence in the 6-stage buying journey that Serious Decisions has developed. I like it for a number of reasons. It's very clean. I think I find it applicable to multiple industries. And the first 2 stages really mean the most to me, and I put the most focus on those. And so, the first stage is challenge the status quo. The second stage is commit to change. And I often will add just stage 0, which is just attention, right? And that attention can be just, the idea of just earning trust, credibility, and just earning the attention, earning the eyeballs on an ongoing basis of your prospect. But when you're at the point where you're challenging someone's status quo and getting them to commit to change, neither of those stages have anything to do with you as a seller. They don't have to do anything to do with the product and service that you're selling either. If you can take yourself out of that conversation and make it all about an outcome that the customer needs, that they desire, that they're willing to go through the pain or the cost of change to achieve, if you've gotten that point, and they've committed to that change, then they have established for themselves, with your help, a foundation that the entire sale can rest upon. Now it doesn't matter, that, oh yeah, we got to go find budget, oh, we got to get another decision maker on board. You have momentum internally. You're already on your way towards building consensus because there's a commitment to the outcome. Not a commitment to your demo, not a commitment to your service, but a commitment to the outcome represented for that customer. And so that's why when you think about, when I see this question of, what steps are needed to move prospects through the funnel, if you think about this purely as from a buying process standpoint and what's required to get that prospect to commit to change, to commit to the outcome, everything else then becomes you advocating for that change and that outcome on behalf of the customer. You earn the right to be more aggressive. You earn the right to be a little more, for lack of a better term, pushy, because you're no longer pushing for your sale. You're pushing to help the prospect prioritize and achieve the outcomes that they care the most about.
Excellent. Well, what about 3, 4, 5, and 6?
Yeah, I mean, once you get to 3, 4, 5, 6, I mean, number 3 is, identify potential solutions. Number 4 is, select a desired solution. Number 5 is then, one of my next favorites, which is justify the decision. Right, and this is the point at which you hopefully have already established the foundational elements for this up front as well. This is where a lot of prospects, a lot of sellers lose their deal because you put so much time and effort into selling to stakeholders. Now they have to take this up to a decision maker, and that decision maker hasn't been involved in the sales process. So not only do you have to then go on, in many cases, resell, but the proposal and the statement of work you put in front of people describes the product you're selling, not the outcome you're representing. And so I think there's a huge opportunity for us to reframe the opportunity and to resell the outcome again through every piece of material we send to prospects, including proposals, including statement of works, including MSAs for that point. And the other important point of justifying the decision is a foundational element from the beginning of the sales process as well, and this comes straight from the challenger sale, that you as a seller, no matter how much trust and loyalty and credibility you build, you will never have as much influence and pull with the prospect as the people internally inside the organization have with the decision maker. So your ability early in the sales process to build a consensus, to understand the different stakeholders and influencers that are going to help influence whether that deal gets prioritized and done, their ability to influence the decision maker and the executive sponsors is way more important. So once you get to the justify the decision phase, ideally that's a short phase because you've already built the foundation for it. And 6 is, complete the transaction. 6 is mostly, you get through procurement and you get the deal done. But honestly, once you get to the sales process, once you get to the point where they're evaluating solutions, where you're talking about features, the hardest part of the sale should have already been done, which is getting that prospect committed to the change.
And it's kind of funny, Matt, because often we see salespeople work in the opposite direction, right? They want to put the solution out there and start pitching that before they've addressed points 1 and 2. And then I love stage 5 because that just speaks to what Carol was talking about a moment ago, that we know what's adding to the complexity of the sale is that organizations are spending much more time evaluating the real return on investment and justifying that decision. Carol, anything that you would add here based on what Matt was just talking about?
Well, absolutely. It definitely leads to the buyers themselves and the buying committees not wanting to take a risk because it might cost them their job, or there are downsides for them. So I wanted to clap when Matt was talking about addressing that, because you really have to, as a marketer, as a solution provider, help those buyers address the risk in order to help them to begin to mitigate it, to give them a reason to go for it, because this is going to help them immeasurably, and actually the downside is quite small, and whatever you can do to convince them of that, or show them ways to use your tool at the front end, even if they're not using the full power of that particular software program, that, if they're using these 3 components, it's going to pay off and it will affect their bottom line. So absolutely. I would also, cite in terms of just moving people through the sales funnel and helping to build loyalty, I'll cite again some of our research, as I am wont to do. Buyer expectations are changing. That's based on our research. It's based on Sirius and Forrester research. And it's really not just about price. People want a solution provider. I think it's similar to consumer marketing. They want a solution provider that gets them, that understands them. We all are loyal to certain brands. So, it's important, I think, for organizations to deliver that personalized, knowledgeable experience. It's not enough anymore for vendors to be familiar with the workings of their own product. Today, B2B buyers expect them to be knowledgeable about the companies that they're pitching, the wider business landscape, and I think that comes up a lot too with these more casual conversations that happen over social media. And that simply requires a more integrated and intimate approach, and that's across both sales and marketing, I think. And it's going to have to be a disciplined approach to nurturing those customers throughout the course of that lengthy B2B life cycle. So it also means that customer lifetime value figures into the equation. I'm hearing more and more people that we interview and talk to for stories on Demand Gen Report, talking about that today. It really figures more into the equation. Onboarding is something that likely needs more attention than it's getting. It's such a crucial time to cement that new relationship and define the customer success from day one. And then that also opens up additional revenue opportunities because you can cross-sell to those folks. I think job function targeting is very effective. Individual team members are cross-functional, so you need to figure out what you can do to appeal to each of them, focus on the roles of those people that are on the buying team, figure out what their different perspectives are, what matters to them, what their different interests are, and then personalize the messaging for those individuals on the buying team.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And actually, I've been in the world of sales for quite some time, and back in the day when I started, we didn't have all the resources to do the kind of targeted, more detailed kind of digging that you're talking about, Carolyn, as Matt was talking about earlier too. I mean, it's criminal to me when salespeople do not spend the time to doing the upfront homework to learn more about the people who are involved in the overall process and really finding ways to figure out what's going to be important to them. So I think that's a really relevant point that you made. So now let's talk about content, because this, in my mind, is almost starting to become almost overused. I mean, it's an important strategy, but I just keep hearing people say, just use content, whether it's on the sales or the marketing side. And I feel like people throw that phrase around a lot without really helping to clearly define a little more strategically what that kind of means for sales and marketing. So Carol, let's start with you. I mean, what are some of the, first of all, how does content play into perhaps attracting people into the funnel or moving them through the process? And then in a minute, I want to have you talk a little bit more about how buyers are choosing, the winning vendor.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's almost a seamless expectation from buyers that even if they're self-navigating, their expectation levels for relevant information that they need at a certain time when they're looking for it is crucial. So again, back to the personalization point, that's crucial for the website experience with more buyers self-navigating through a lot of that journey. Marketing and sales are going to need to be responsible for driving the early brand impression and becoming more influential in helping to sort of drive that buyer's selection process. When we asked buyers what they seek from vendor websites, and I touched on a little bit of this already, when they're conducting research, 69% in the stats that are up on the next slide, thank you, 69% said they want relevant content that speaks directly to their company. Sorry, we're looking at two different bits of information, so I will get to that in a minute. 66% said they wanted easy access to pricing and competitive info. 64% wanted vendor-focused content, case studies and product data sheets, specific information from that person that can easily provide it. Search and navigation tools and easy access to content. No long registration forms was also more than half. But the reasons that they chose the winning vendor was timeliness to inquiries, a strong knowledge of the solution area and the business landscape, which kind of ties back to the relevant content that speaks directly to their company, and just knowing more about that company and then providing content that makes it easier to show ROI, helps them build a business case for the purchase, or in the early stages, which is often when the sales folks are talking to them, simply educates them. But they definitely want to focus on. I think the content is the driver of everything else. To me, yes, that's my business, so maybe I'm a little biased, but we did a content preferences survey a few months back, and more than half of B2B buyers said they rely on content now, more on content now to research their buying decisions than a year ago. Respondents to that survey told us that content that includes independent voices, thought leaders, third-party analysts, their peers, really resonated with them the most. But it's a little bit difficult for the folks that are producing the content to keep up with those changing needs, because we also found out they seem to have hit a limit regarding how much content they can view during the buying process because they're so overwhelmed, because of the level of choice. So 73% said they have less time to devote to reading and research than they did a year ago. Shorter content formats are cited as preferred by, it looks like, 88% of our audience who took the survey. So, you know, when they do spend time with content, B2B buyers are looking for shorter form. They're turned off by heavy sales pitches. They're turning increasingly to LinkedIn and Twitter feeds to get recommendations from their peers and see what types of content that people in similar roles are talking about and sharing with their peers. So, you know, white papers, webinars, those are stalwarts. They remain stalwarts when it comes to capturing leads and nurturing them through the buying process. The buyers said they want content that can help them benchmark their strategies, success stories from others facing similar challenges. But most of them, 83% to be exact, are just overwhelmed by the amount of content available. I mean, I think, you know, sort of the takeaway best advice is the strategy, whatever your content strategy, really needs to focus on the quality of the content rather than sheer quantity of how many white papers you have and how many videos you've created.
Absolutely, and as we can see from this slide where you're talking about the personalized and knowledgeable experience, you know, 90% say that one of the reasons why they chose a particular vendor is that they provided content that made it easier to demonstrate that ROI, right? So getting back to both what you and Matt have said about how important it is to be able to demonstrate the return on investment and justify that decision. Anything else here about the slide that you think is important to kind of call out? I mean, we've talked about knows the company and our needs, right? Demonstrates solution area and knows the business landscape. Vendor response. Now that's an interesting one that I'd like to talk to both of you about. I don't know that salespeople are always as responsive as they need to be, and yet they often will blame the buyer for the process being slowed down. What do you think?
I agree. It's funny. We always leave a few open-ended questions where people can write in comments, and you always get that kind of one or two or sometimes three areas where a lot of people say the same thing. And this was one where several times over, folks that took the survey said, you know, the reaction time was really slow, or, you know, we were waiting and they wanted to rush and suddenly everything slowed down. And so I think it really does speak to not being completely keyed into the needs of the customer and being more, salespeople perhaps being more driven by their quota than helping to, you know, meet the needs of that particular customer. And understandably, they're under pressure too. But yeah, it was interesting that some of the problems that they had were timeliness of response, or that the salesperson was too sales pitchy, or that they didn't really understand their business and their needs.
Absolutely. So Matt, before we move into talking about how salespeople can use content, I mean, you do a tremendous amount of work with content strategy with your clients. So what are your thoughts about how content can really drive opportunity, and what's the best way, or what should people be thinking about in terms of aligning with today's funnel to help, you know, kind of connect the content to moving a prospect through to perhaps conversation and then beyond?
Well, I think most companies are too narrow in their thinking of content. I prefer to take the view that Ann Hanley has. She's the Chief Content Officer for Marketing Profs. Just, you know, she's written a number of books, including Content Rules. Just brilliant stuff. And, you know, she has many times said, everything the light touches is content. And think about that in terms of your business, right? I mean, the words your sales reps use on the phone is content. The voicemail they leave is content. The emails they send, the email templates you give them, that is all content. So, you know, how does that reflect on you as a business? How does that reflect your intent with the prospect? If you look at your templates and you look at your brochures, if you use the words I and we too often, then you're alienating the prospect. You're showing them that you care more about yourself than you care about the prospect and their needs. You know, good marketing, good content isn't about your product. It's about people and problems. So all of your content, I mean, first of all, I think to be able to take a much wider view of what content is and how that content can impact your prospects is really, really important. But then to also understand the more of that content that can be buyer-centric, that can address issues that the buyer has, you are only going to accelerate the impact and velocity of trust, credibility, and engagement with prospects by doing that.
Excellent. Well, so now as we kind of continue the content conversation, Matt, you probably will agree with me that expert noise is getting pretty deafening in that a lot of them are insisting that salespeople, because you know, there's content from the marketing point of view, but then there's also content that salespeople are going to be using as part of developing relationships, establishing trust, nurturing opportunities. And there are a lot of people out there insisting that salespeople must create their own content. What do you think about that? Should they be creating their own content? And if not, why not?
No, and this is a controversial subject, and I do know some salespeople that actually are quite good writers, and they're very good at creating content, and that's all fine and good. But look, I'm a small business owner, and we don't have a big sales team, but I look at my salespeople, and I'm like, listen, I don't want you creating content, I want you selling. Most sales reps are not very efficient, nor are they very good at creating content. But even if they are, even if they were, I would prefer to have someone else do that work for them and have them go about selling. Just because they might actually be good with numbers doesn't mean you want them to calculate their own commission check, right? Just because someone is good at something doesn't mean that's the best use of their time for you. So I think it's really important that prospects understand how to use content, how to apply the right content in the right place at the right time with their prospects depending on where they are in the buying cycle. But no, I don't want sales reps creating their own content.
Well, and I wrote a post about this myself because I always find that sometimes it's too polarizing. It's either or. And there may be some situations where, a salesperson has the time and they're good at it and they can do it. But I think the important thing to think about is that content is reflective back on the company they are representing, yes?
Yes.
So if they're not a good writer, as an example, then that might have the opposite effect of what they're really trying to accomplish. And not everybody is a good writer, but as you said, there's multiple ways to create content. And so I think salespeople and the sales teams I work with are certainly already time-starved. So to ask them to try and do this, which would be a whole new muscle they need to stretch, right, and learn about, I think is asking way too much. Carol, what are your thoughts about that?
Oh, yeah, I have to agree with both of you, and I think it's the marketer's domain who also has the entire universe of content strategy in front of them, and to expect even for a salesperson who even is a good writer to kind of dip in and dip out of that and understand how one piece works with the larger group of pieces of content is really unfair to the salesperson. So yeah, I do agree that salespeople should be selling, as Matt said.
Yeah, and so they're going to be able to leverage content that's being created on their behalf, and they can integrate that as part of the process, I think. So, Carol, let's just continue with you. So, what about internet and social networks? Don't they provide new opportunities now to build those scalable pipelines and enable reps to actually get ahead of that decision-making curve?
Absolutely. When the DGR buyer survey reveals that peers and colleagues are in the top 3 information sources for B2B buyers, that social media and online review sites have moved up in importance. I mean, that's a big shift. Peer power and influence becomes more important. Providing buyers with validation and proof points needs new consideration. It might mean when it comes to the type of content that will resonate with buyers, interactive web-based tools like calculators and quizzes can help buyers build their case and benchmark themselves compared with their peers. And of course, particularly with LinkedIn and Twitter, for B2B folks, social media has definitely had a major impact for sales, right? So we're all hearing cold calling is losing its effectiveness. I mean, when you're on the phone with that prospect, you're much further down the funnel. When's the last time anyone saw a decision maker pick up a landline from an unknown number? So I think social has really replaced that in many ways as a tool for people to connect and continue to communicate and for sales to generate pipeline. So I think as we see more and more companies who are beginning to even be able to attribute revenue to social selling, you'll see that grow even more in importance. I think what's important for salespeople is that they need to leverage their professional brand to find and target the right people, and then they can fill the pipeline by using that intelligence they've gained on these people to build genuine and real relationships with them.
Absolutely. Well, so Matt, I'm going to have you kick this off. We want to make sure before we start to wrap up the session and get to some questions, what are some of the things that you would just kind of from a high level start recommending to sales and marketing organizations? What sorts of actions and steps could they be taking now to make sure that they are adapting to kind of this new reality that we've been talking about?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a couple things here quickly. I think first, because you address here sales and marketing, I think it's important that they get on the same page first in terms of objectives, and then in terms of their definitions. So objectives meaning you have to hit a certain number together, right? If sales doesn't hit their number, marketing isn't successful either. So they're both in this together. They need to have a common set of math that understands to hit a certain number, you need to have a certain you have to have a certain pipeline of a certain size. To get to that pipeline, you need to have a certain number of leads. That is one set of math. In too many organizations, marketing is working from a totally different set of math. So having the same spreadsheet in front of you is step number one. Step number two is agreeing to definitions. What is a qualified lead? What is a qualified opportunity? What does it mean to say, okay, we're going to need to have a 3x or 4x pipeline of what we think is going to close at the end of the month, end of the quarter? What does that mean? Is it budget authority need timeline? Like, what are the criteria that you agree to together? So having a foundation of common objectives and definitions for sales and marketing is foundational. But I also think it's critical that those organizations root themselves in the buyer. Who is their customer? Who are the different decision makers in the organization? How do they buy? Meaning, how do they walk through those buying stages? And what are the buyer-centric messages and storylines you're going to include in your sales process moving forward? It's not a marketing thing. It's not a sales thing. It is a buying journey thing that you're both managing together. So common objectives, common definitions, and a deeper understanding of your customer and the stages they go through in the buying process. Those three things, you're not going to have them by this afternoon, but I think you start to put more focus on that, you'll start to make some real progress.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you mentioned that because actually one of the next segment in Microsoft Series is really focusing time and attention on defining that ideal customer profile because that's such an important starting point. Before we move on to talk for a minute or so about the role that technology plays in all of this, and any thoughts based on what Matt's just said, Carol, about what steps, what actions should sales and marketing organizations be thinking about so that they can start to adapt and really meet the needs of new buyer expectations?
Well, I love what Matt talked about in terms of agreeing to definitions and criteria and making sure to set that foundation. I also think that nurturing and nurture programs are more important than ever for sales and marketing to adapt to. You have to keep the buyer engaged over time. You need to do it across so many different channels in order to get them what they want, when they want it. So I think it also goes back to making content marketing that much more important, driving the desire for needs-specific, really customized content. I think other things sales and marketing can do to adapt include evaluating some of the newer strategies. A lot of the buzz around predictive analytics and account-based marketing is warranted, but predictive will help marketers and salespeople answer the anonymous folks online, for one thing, and help to curate personalized content for them. ABM can help them communicate with all these multiple stakeholders within an organization. But evaluating those strategies carefully, making sure you have the foundation that Matt talks about before embarking on those, so that you can build smartly upon foundational elements and then dip your toe in, check it out, but not necessarily rush into it because it's the hot, new, shiny object.
Absolutely. Well, so this is a great for us to start to wind down our conversation before we take some questions. Then there's technology, and I see a lot of people, right, they lead with the tools, they lead with the technology. I don't remember the number, but maybe it was Miles Austin who was talking about the hundreds of new technology pieces that came out in the past year. So how does an organization get their head around the role that technology needs to play, and when is enough? Like, how big does that stack need to be on the marketing or sales side before you finally say, you know what, we've got what we need? And Carol, this also comes back to your research, which said that it's very important now to decision-making teams, when they're thinking about making the purchase, how is that technology going to fit into the existing technology? So Matt, what are your thoughts on this?
Oh man, I mean, I think too many companies let the tail wag the dog here. You know, we get excited about technology and buy it for a point solution without thinking about how it fits into our broader needs, without thinking about and investing in actually rolling it out successfully and helping the organization develop a rhythm and a habit of using it regularly. And I think most companies start with technology as opposed to starting with their strategy, right? I mean, what is your sales and marketing strategy? Where are the roadblocks or constraints that are keeping you from achieving better results, and where do you need to focus there? It's not about having a big stack. It's not about buying the right technology. It's not about buying the products that you see like with the biggest booths at Dreamforce. It's about understanding your unique sales process and your unique needs and focusing on the tools that are going to help you sell more, sell faster, sell better. And it's a different answer for every company. I could, if you asked me today what's the best marketing automation platform on the market, I could give you an answer. I could also tell you that platform is probably inappropriate for 98% of companies that are asking me that question. Because not just because something is the flashiest and the best doesn't mean it's the best for you, nor does it mean it is a priority for you given the other things you could be investing in. So look, I mean, technology is not a strategy. Technology is an enabler of your strategy, and it's important that people put it in that kind of context.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm a big believer that you've got to start with the strategy, and I think it's people are focusing too much on the tools. And in part, I put some of the onus on salespeople too. That's where they're trying to focus people's attention versus, flipping that to make sure that there's a real strategy in place first, and then figuring out how the technology align. I mean, I was at a conference just a few months ago, and someone was proudly displaying a slide of their sales stack, and I thought to myself, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? I could not believe the number of tools, and I was thinking, how does the salesperson even get their head around that? So, Carol, any thoughts from you around the role that technology plays?
Yes, completely agree 1,000% with both of you. Absolutely needs to be. I mean, we're on a webcast right now, and the supporting technology I think is on 24 or one of the webcast platforms. But the technology is the enabler. It's the, if you will, the plumbing. What's really important with our webcast is the conversation that we're having, and folks learning in the audience that are dialed in, whether they're taking away some good action points to be better at their job, and not whether the tool was fully functional and knocked their socks off. So completely agree. I think it's so much more, despite the fact that, yes, when we do our research, people are spending more budget on demand gen overall. They're spending a larger part of the demand gen budgets on emerging strategies like the ABM strategies and like predictive. But I think it needs to be approached carefully with the eye towards what's the outcome that we want, not that it's yet another brand new technology. Hey, let's try this out. Maybe this one will work. Absolutely the wrong approach. Right.
Couldn't agree more. I have time for one or two questions before I need to wrap up today's session. I mean, it's just great stuff we've been talking about. So one of the audience members says, we know we need to make these changes, but it just seems so darn complex. What suggestions do you have for them for cutting through some of that complexity of pipeline and funnel management? I don't know who wants it. Matt, you want to take that one?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you're not going to get all this done right away, right? I mean, even in the last 45, 50 minutes, this has been the equivalent of asking you to change about 35 things in your golf swing and then send you back on the course for another round. I mean, you can't do all of those things at once. What I always encourage people to do is, there's a lot of good advice here that Carol's had, a lot of good advice that we've sort of addressed in this time. find the one or two things that really speak to you because it resonates with some challenges you have in your own sales process. Triage and prioritize how you're going to address these based on a combination of the impact they'll have for you as well as the ease with which you'll think you'll be able to adopt it to build some momentum and velocity, in the organization to achieve the other things as well. So yeah, I mean, you can't tackle this all at once. Perfect is the enemy of good, and I think you have to, be rational about what you can address and when, but make those choices intentionally to start to make some forward progress on your results.
Excellent. Anything you would add to that, Carol?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's precisely kind of the direction I was going to go in. I think it is important to iterate and bite off those bite-sized chunks, and it's great advice to go, gravitate to the thing that kind of really interests you. So if it's, perfecting your social selling approach, then start there. But I also think it does get back to that point about agreeing to some foundational definitions, criteria. I think communication is so key, and that there are not enough conversations happening within the organization, but particularly between sales and marketing. And when those conversations and communication happen, and when that communication is increased and you're able to plan together, I think that's where that's worth building on, that foundation, that solid foundation, because then you can go from there and then iterate accordingly.
Well, I just got to say, you two we've just had a pretty meaty conversation here about how buyer behavior has really affected the traditional sales funnel. And what's crazy about it is we've just scratched the surface. So I hope that people listening in have really enjoyed hearing from both Matt and Carol, and will benefit from, taking some of the actions that they're suggesting, because it's a lot, and absolutely it's good to kind of take those chunks. You're going to continue to iterate. Loved your golf analogy, Matt. That's absolutely right. Right? You can't learn 35 new things and then 5 minutes later go out to the course and you're going to have it all perfected. So, it's definitely a work in progress. But I hope, and I think the overarching message here is that get going wherever you are. Get going. Keep going. So for those of you who've been listening in, if you've enjoyed today's session, we've got some other programs that you might find relevant. Both Matt and Carol talked about the power of sales and marketing alignment. We do, Microsoft offers an on-demand program that we did recently. I think you'll really like that. And so also, previous on-demand, we talked about, social selling and the one view of the customer, which also Carol and Matt talked about today. And then finally, you can check out an on-demand, panel discussion with some of the Microsoft executives talking about the importance of tight integration between sales, marketing, and finance, because it's critically important that you break out of those silos for sure. So here's how you can connect with all of us. Certainly, I want you to reach out to Matt and Carol. You can learn more about the work that they do, and certainly feel free to reach out to me with any questions that you might have related to sales and social selling. But feel free to connect with all three of us and, let us know what you thought about the session. Share with us any other questions or concerns you have. We'd certainly love the opportunity to hear from you. So I want to go ahead and thank everybody for joining today's session. Remember that Microsoft offers not only Dynamics CRM, but a host of other business applications that can help to support that alignment that we've been talking about between sales, marketing, and service professionals, that enables them to be much more productive and successful in this new world, because it really is a new world. It's changing so fast, and I can only imagine what's coming. I always laugh when people say, what do you think is going to happen in the next 5 years? And I usually say, I'm not sure what's going to happen in the next 5 months. But certainly talk to the folks at Microsoft in the Dynamics Business Applications area. You can give them a call and learn more about what they do and how they can help support you in your business. I'm Barb Giamanco. It's been my pleasure to host today's Microsoft Dynamics Business Applications webcast, talking about the modern day sales funnel. Matt, Carol, thank you so much for joining us today. You just really brought a wealth of knowledge and experience to the conversation. We really appreciate you joining us.
Thanks, Barb.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Absolutely. All right, so thanks again, everybody, for listening, and look for more Microsoft Dynamics Business Applications webinars coming soon. Thanks again, and until next time.